So if you really crystal clear on, okay, here's the playing style, it's going to be a 6, 12, 18, maybe even season-long piece of work. I'm going to break it down into those are the 2 bits we're going after in that particular segment, and then that links to your plans. That will then help you to think about a number of different ways to reinforce the same messages. Hello and a very warm welcome to Coaching Cards. My name is Matt and I'm delighted to be joined by Katie and Joe. So the first question is, what do game styles mean and why are they important?
The game style is really like your approach, your style of play. So how are we looking to play in possession, out of possession? So in possession, maybe how are we looking to build, how are we looking to finish the attack? Out of possession, how are we looking to press, how quickly we're looking to win the ball back?
I think also game styles an identity, the identity of a particular club or a particular nation. And that identity can also be the personality of the coach that will come out in a game style.
Yeah, and I'd probably just add to that, sometimes it's about breaking down some of those moments in the games. You mentioned things like, retain and build. Okay, we've got the ball, we've got it secured, where we're looking then to play it next. Then we're going to progress and penetrate, try and get around the penalty box, create and score. If we win it back, is there a chance to attack quickly? So we might be looking to counter-attack. And then all this will then depend on how we're going to set up out of possession. Are we going to defend high up the pitch, in the middle of the pitch, low to the pitch? But I really like that word identity, because I think that summarises the playing style and what it means to that particular group and or club.
Joe, what do coaches need to consider when choosing a style of play?
If it's a professional club, the history of that club, the culture of that club, the expectations of both the owners and the supporters, and also in terms of style, what capabilities are required of the players in order to produce the style, but that the players can express themselves within that style as well.
I think a great question for a coach to explore when they're starting to get into this is, do you fit your philosophy around your players, or do you look at your players and then let them shape your philosophy? And I think it depends on your context, but in the world of grassroots and everything up to the top level of the game, then I think you almost need to look at your players and maybe have a hybrid of the two, so that you don't lose what you believe in as a coach, but then equally you look at what your players can do and what they maybe can't do yet, and you play to their strengths whilst also attempting to deal with the threat that the opposition might present to you.
Yeah, I think that word balance is really vital. So kind of the balance between what your biases are probably as a coach, how you see the way you want the team to play, and then marrying that up then with actually, as you said, like the capabilities of the players, because it's all well and good me as a coach wanting us to play a certain way and drilling that into the players, but if my players can't actually do it or can't meet my expectations with it, I have to there probably let my guard down a little bit and maybe slightly alter what I'm asking my players to do based on their capabilities. And obviously that will really alter based on the level of players you're working with, whether you're working with under nines or if you're working with senior team players. Obviously their capabilities will kind of be across a massive spectrum.
I think just to add to that, if you're imposing something on them, you could be setting them up to fail if they've not got the tools, the strengths to be able to play that out. But if you flip it on its head and you're looking at what the players can do and you're involving them in that process, then that's more likely to make them feel empowered, motivated, driven to want to go and deliver. What it is that shared belief, vision, identity that we talked about earlier, and bring it to life on the pitch.
I think also depending on what age group you're actually coaching. If you're in the real development phase with the 12s, 13s, 14s, there's more time. It's more about the individual capabilities to fit into that style. Once you get into senior level where results become really important, then there has to be sort of a quick end result, and therefore that style at some point, not necessarily change, but will be impacted by what the opposition do.
I like the term being tactically flexible, because again, there's no such thing as a certain game. You might hope that your plan A is going to work, but if you're not prepared to be flexible and explore other options, then again we might be putting all our eggs in one basket, and we need our players to be able to problem solve potentially in the moment, rather than just look for the coach or team of staff on the sideline to make a tactical change. So again, that might come into your style of play, but also your overall coaching philosophy. And I think your coaching philosophy has got to talk to your playing philosophy, and those two have got to come together under the umbrella of what the club's morals, values and beliefs are.
Yeah. And that really does emphasise the importance of the role of the coach in order to clearly communicate those messages. Matt, can you explain what the principles of play are and the importance of them when it comes to working on styles of play?
So we mentioned about moments in the game, so in possession, out of possession and transition. I really simplify this because again I spend a lot of my time working with grassroots coaches. For principles of play I always go to, can you understand space? So where our team might want to create space and use it. Also, can you understand where we might want to deny the opposition space, make it difficult for them? And if we can get those two marrying up, that then helps with things like movement, support, being creative on the ball when we've got it. If we're looking to stop it, we're being disciplined, so our control and restraint comes in. We're looking at when we might press, when we might deny. So those are some of the more, what I call football terminology principles of play, then start to make more sense because we've got this overarching understanding of, well, what is space? Can I understand it when my team's got it and when they've not got it?
You know, if we are looking at creating space, well, how are we doing that? How are we creating time on the ball to have that space, but then also the options that our players then provide us then to actually get on the ball? Because obviously if I'm going to be selfless as a player and create space, I'm not just creating space for myself, I'm probably creating space for my teammate as well. So I'm giving more options to the player on the ball. So obviously we've got our 5 in possession ones that you've mentioned and our 5 out of possession ones. And, you know, one of our in possession ones is penetrate. And that's probably not a word you might use with younger players. You might just say, find the gaps, play through the gaps. So it's making sure you're able to adapt your language around our key principles based on who you're obviously talking to them with, whether it's a young player, whether it's a parent. Trying to onboard the parents obviously is so important when you are going after your game model, your style of play. Getting them part of the process and onboarding them will be really, really key to helping their child develop throughout the season.
I think you both described there really well the principles of play and that framework that it gives for coaches to work off and for players to understand. And you talked about in possession, out of possession. There's also a key element in terms of transition. So when that ball sort of quickly changes hands and players have that understanding of what's required in those moments of the game. And that can then link very much to your style of play. So if you're going to be a team that counter presses, the players really need to understand what to do within transition.
And I'd probably finish off by saying that the principles of play are always there. It's like the ingredients to a cake. It's trying to mix them and make sense of them when they're all taking place. And I think the skill of a coach, especially on a match day, is observing where the principles of play are and how they're interacting with each other. Taking a step back as a coach and observing the principles of play is a skill, not one I've mastered, but I think the more you do it and the more situations you put yourself in where you're seeing game-related activities and or problems, the more likely you are to get at spotting them.
We've found, looking at like insights, that in like a top level Premier League game, a team has about 110 transitions per game themselves. So you're looking at probably 220 across the whole game for 2 teams. So if you're starting to go down to foundation phase where the pitch is even smaller, it's tighter spaces, and obviously in terms of the level and their capabilities, you're probably looking at 200 turnovers a game just for your team. So those moments of being in possession, transition, out of possession are so fluid, chaotic. So I think giving our players opportunities to actually be in those moments is positive, because it gives them the experiences then to, you know, really become more well-rounded across those 3 areas of the game, when they're in possession, when they're out of possession, and when they are transitioning from defence to attack or transitioning from attack to defence.
So I'll come to you, Katie, with this one. So do you have any top tips to help coaches work on game styles at training?
Giving players that repetition. So we obviously talk a lot about the 3 R's. So your repetition, your relevance, and your game realism. And within training, you might slightly dial up your kind of your repetition. So giving players maybe smaller area stuff, maybe to work on pressing. So you might do a practice where you're 2v3. So with that, you might slightly lose maybe your game realism, because you're maybe taken out of the context of the game, but giving them loads of repetition of doing that particular thing. Then if you look at pressing and then you go to, training the next week or the next day, you might do an 8v8 practice. So the repetition of the pressing might slightly dial down, but your game realism goes up. But they have had the repetition the week before or the couple of weeks prior to really learn about, how to deny, how to delay, how to dictate. So they get that repetition, that gets really honed in on them. But then they get the experience then of actually in like an 8v8 more game realism, that then it's actually more suited to what might actually happen on a match day. I think that's really key.
I think also to link to that, the session design is really fundamental to ensuring that the players can produce the game style that you're after, and focusing in on small units of players as opposed to the team, and looking at individual capabilities. So for players to play in a particular role, in a particular style, probably require them to have certain capabilities. So to give them the opportunity to practice those things during the week in a smaller number of practice would be one of my tips.
Yeah, I would ask the question to the coaches, does your diet of practice, one, fit your coaching philosophy, but two, help them to learn the style of play that you're going after? Is there a purpose to what you're doing? Because I think, and I used to fall foul of this as a novice coach when I first started, was I'd find a great practice or a great game plan and I'd go and deliver it because it looked cool, but I didn't necessarily understand the purpose, the aims and objectives. Whereas if you start at the end point, which is, right, we want to create this style of play, which might be, we're going to sit deep, look to win the ball back and then hit them on the counter. Does everything we do within that 6-week block of work link to the title of the film? And then it's about breaking it down and going, well, what are the roles of the actors within it? What are the responsibilities I'm asking those individual actors to do? So I think little wins where you can link it to the style of play that you're going after will just help with the purpose and buy in from the players to go, I understand where this piece of the jigsaw fits come game day.
I think it's also important to say that in terms of game style and playing style and players' own style, giving them the freedom at times just to play and allow them to be creative within their own practice, because they will then develop their own skills, their own particular methods of doing things within a particular style.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously we'll have some great resources coming out on our England Football Learning website, which dive into some 6-week plans, and we've got loads of stuff on there around the practice spectrum and the step principles. So hopefully coaches there, if they're a bit stuck in the rut about what to go after, we've got loads of stuff available that, hopefully once they've watched us here, they can go and have a look at the resources we have and start to think of obviously players first. So who do they have available? What are their capabilities? And how, as we've said, does that match up with their own philosophy as a coach? And hopefully it will support coaches on their journey with developing a style of play or a game model or a game style. So Jo, do you have any top tips to help coaches work on game styles on match day?
My first tip would be, don't change anything that you haven't been doing during the week. Also as a coach, you mentioned, Matt, about being observant, and I think game day is a real opportunity for coaches to be observant and allow players that independence to decision make and identify what's happening on the pitch. Pick key moments to give key messages and think very carefully about 1 or 2 key messages, not bombarding people with information.
And I think just to build on that, is your language consistent? So if you're working on defending with, say, 7 to 11-year-olds and you've talked about high press or pressing with you, your mate and another one, it's, okay, we're going to hunt in packs today. So your pre-match team talk should link back to things that you've covered either that week or in the previous weeks. So the other top tip I would give is that the warm-up on match day is such a good opportunity to recap things on the grass. So don't be afraid to have some flex in your warm-up. Yes, we've got to get them ready physically, but getting them ready technically and tactically could be, okay, we did a 10-minute practice during the week. It might have been attack versus defence. And so therefore we might reset that practice up on a game day. So I think be really clever and creative but purposeful with your warm-up to recap some of those messages that you've been delivering during the week on the grass, so they go, yeah, I recall that now.
We've mentioned a lot about observation. I think when I'm talking about being a skillful observer, I think we can all be guilty of watching the whole game, and when we watch the whole game, you actually end up seeing nothing because you're looking for too much, but look for 2 or 3 key things. So if I'm wanting to, I'm working senior football, so we're looking for performance rather than development, and the game's all about winning 3 points. So I'm watching the game with the lens of, well, what are the opposition doing? Where are their strengths? Where are their weaknesses? So how can we skillfully observe that and get messages quickly onto our players on the pitch with consistent language that they understand, that straight away they go, right, that's where we can probably get in behind, or that's where we actually have a little bit of a strength. We've got pacey wingers, we've got a pacey number 9, and we might slightly vary up our gameplay to try and exploit those weaknesses that we as coaches have observed in the opposition. And the value of filming a game day You don't have to have fancy filming equipment. You can, get a phone, obviously ensure that everything's agreed with parents from both sides if you're working with young players. But the importance of filming games or filming key moments and then being able to then work on that within training, it keeps that consistency for the players. And if you don't have that available, notational analysis. And if you're a coach on your own, it's okay, grab a parent, grab an injured player, grab a player from the bench who can make maybe 2 or 3 key notes, consistent messaging. And then that then ties back really nicely and into training that week, into match day the week after, and it's like a really nice ongoing cycle.
Never neglect the opinions of the players as well, the players that are playing and what they're seeing out on the pitch, and always give them the platform to relay what information they've got, what concerns they might have, or what ideas they might have to change things.
And I think to add to that, I think you have to be brave to ask your players, but you have to be braver still to listen. And linked to observations, as we know, there's so many different moving pieces to a game. So another top tip would be, don't watch the game, analyse it. Because when you watch something, you kind of relax and you miss things, whereas when you analyse it, you hone in. I love the idea of maybe look at 2-3 things max, because when we first start to watch football, we tend to be ball watchers. And actually, when you think about it, only a very small % of the players can only ever be on the ball at any one time, and a lot of the game happens away and around. So when we talk about principles of play like movement, positioning and support, some of that stuff is happening, in fact most of it, away from the ball. And if I give the example of typical mini soccer, it's normally bees round honey, isn't it? But if you get one player who happens to hold their position, rather than focusing on everyone being clustered together, it might just be that quick bit of praise if you've been working on creating space to say to little Johnny or little Josephine, hey, I saw that, you held your position really well, I've seen it, fantastic.
And I think it's really important to link what you've been doing in training. If you're working on a particular block of work, link the training to the game and congratulate players, like you say, for being able to transfer things into a game format. To help new coaches, how much detail are they expected to provide to players? Does this change depending on the level they work at?
I think my head takes me to a bit of research I got given a few years ago about how much information an average human being can retain. So I think when you're working with, I think it was 5 to 7 bits of information, and that was for an adult. If you then scale it down and go back to the point you raised there, Katie, around 2-3 key bits of information. So if you really crystal clear on, okay, here's the playing style. It's going to be a 6, 12, 18, maybe even season-long piece of work. I'm going to break it down into those are the 2 bits we're going after in that particular segment. And then that links to your plans. That will then help you to think about a number of different ways to reinforce the same messages. If I then spend some time just looking at what a 7 to 11-year-old might remember, because think about a typical 7-year-old, they're very quickly thinking about what they're doing, but also what they might be doing next. They become easily distracted. So in order to keep their focus and attention, less is more. It's just making sure that the practice that you might be putting on in training, or the moment you might be having on a match day, is really personable to them. So use of their name, Jacob, you did this really, really well during the week. Love to see you do it on a match day. If it's in training, going back to catch them doing something well, I will encouraging you to be brave on the ball. I saw that you were brave. He might have lost possession of the ball after 3 seconds, but I'm going to focus in on what those 3 seconds look like. He used 3 different parts of the feet. He looked up. So I'm giving feedback that's detailed, but it's specific to that player. But it's all under that one bit of information of, okay, being brave on the ball. So I think, just making sure that you stick to that less is more, and you reinforce in a number of different ways. That will give you a chance to really anchor those learning points down.
I mean, I love that positive reinforcement. I think there's nothing better. I think when we've all played and the coach gives you a little ripple for what you've done, even if it's something so minor, it gives you confidence to whatever you go on to do next on the ball. When you are going after a particular game style or style of play, onboarding players is so vital. So that's why it's got to be clear, it's got to be consistent messaging, it's got to be consistent language. You need to consider your tone of voice when you're talking to your players. All of those things are so key, and I think those messages for me are consistent no matter whether you're working with foundation phase players or senior players.
Yeah. And I think for new coaches, there's an inclination to try and give everything, to show what you know and let everybody know what you know. Just remember that it's about the players. And on match day, they then should take ownership of that. And you give them, again, that platform to discuss amongst themselves, to get peer-to-peer reviews, and you as the coach sort of become the observer, become the support mechanism, and become the teacher, but from a stand-back point of view.
And again, if we go back to observation skills, if your observations are tuned in, bearing in mind that observation skills aren't just about what you're seeing, it's about what you could be hearing, what you could be feeling. You'll get a good sense check, if you know your players well as people, as to whether or not you've saturated them with information. Mm-hmm. But equally, I think you should trust your gut. If you think, oh, I've given a lot of information there, they're only 7 or they're only 17, bearing in mind, what have they done during the day? What are they coming to the session with in terms of baggage, good, bad and indifferent? If we're working with adults, they could have children of their own. They've come to football as a bit of a release. Mm-hmm. It's much better for them to go away with clarity on 1 or 2 things than for you to have tried to have chased 7, 8 or 9 things. Because then they leave with more confusion than they do with clarity.
I think that's a fantastic point, and every player is different. So I might be a player that can take on board a lot more information. You might only be able to take on 1 or 2 bits of information. So as a coach, how can I really understand my needs of my players? So us as coaches have to be really agile and adaptable, flexible, and probably be willing maybe to push ourselves out of our comfort zone to give more information to those that need it, and recognise when we need to rein ourselves in and maybe only give the 1 or 2 points.
We have to be careful not to pigeonhole people, because everybody is different, or they are different people, and they have different preferences in terms of learning styles and how we then deliver messages as coaches, as you said earlier, Joe, around, is it visual, is it audio, is it reading, is it kinesthetic? So going back to the VARC model for those that are familiar with it, are we making sure that we're delivering the same messages a number of different ways to manage the difference, whilst also making sure that those that do crave that little bit more information are being fed it, and those that want it watered down, which shouldn't be seen as a negative, it's just me recognising the needs of that individual at that moment, they're getting the same level of care, support, teaching that they need in that moment.
Yeah, there was 2 key words there that came out for me, which was care and support.
Yeah.
So understanding, or having the players understand, regardless of what the age is, that you're there as that carer, and I say that in the broadest sense, but also making sure that the support mechanisms are right. And if you're fortunate to have different resources, that support can come in different ways, but knowing when that support's required and how to feed it back into the development programme for each individual.
Joe, what advice do you have to help coaches work on game styles when working in different areas of the game?
Again, I think I alluded to previously about technical competence with players. I think having the capabilities that the player acquires to play the game becomes the utmost importance. Because without that technical competence, we're going to end up in transition constantly, and therefore you'll never get a style of play out. So working and understanding and giving players their individual learning plans, being able to focus in on that, and develop their strengths, and really have a focus on the strengths, in order that they can express themselves, have the freedom to express themselves, be the player that they want to be, allow players to have their own personality. That personality can then come out within the style of play itself.
I think just to focus in on younger players, again, if I go classic grassroots football, might be playing football for the first time, a lot of young players will only be able to have the capability to think about themselves. Obviously we play 5v5, so my advice would be to encourage playing the smallest formats of the game that you can at training, because again, going back to what you can control as a coach, the diet of practices that you put your players through is something that you are in the driving seat for. Again, using that analogy of a jigsaw puzzle, helping younger players by applying a small piece every so often when we think they're ready for it. But I think those building blocks just enable the foundations of the game. So 1v1s, 2v2s, 3v3s, a lot of that in the diet of practice for young players is going to be a really healthy thing for them.
Yeah, and I love that scaffolding is brilliant, and I think we're still looking at, players that are probably younger age groups within their development. We need to ensure we're not pigeonholing them, so they don't come in at 6 and only ever play centre-back, because then they won't have the opportunities to play elsewhere on the pitch, playing on the sides, playing with their back to goal. So we're talking about movement in terms of like a principle of play. My movement can create space for my mate, which might allow us to play through. So I think we need to ensure that when we are working with our younger players, They're not just playing as a centre-back, they're not just playing as a left-back. Might be a left-back who can play centre-mid, who can play in the 9, all of that, because we're starting to see that now, as you said, Joe, inverted fullbacks. So we need to understand what our players needed within that moment, based on their IDPs. Do they need more opportunities in 1v1? Or can we put them into more congested areas where we might be slightly underloaded or overloaded, but it's bigger numbers? And as you said, Matt, they have more to think about then. So I think it's just us recognising the right time to probably scaffold our practices and consider whereabouts we might play our players.
And I think there is a rush to get to 11v11, and I know I've been guilty of that myself. But looking at the small game formats and the returns that you can get from those small game formats, certainly it means time on the pitch for all players at all times, but then the ability of the coach to recognise what they want from that particular small game. And it certainly gives lots of repetition, lots more ball contact, but makes players thoughtful players and understanding the connections in 3s or 5s or 7s, and it can build to the bigger game, the 11v11.
And if we go back to the 6 key capabilities, so scanning, positioning, movement, timing, technique, deception, a younger player, again, don't want to generalise, but if they are new to the game, they will not necessarily be aware of those capabilities, and they almost don't need to. They just need to have the freedom to have a ball at their feet and explore, and it's our job as the coach then to fill in the gaps in knowledge. But if we're putting them into situations whereby they are building up their football memory of these different pictures, and they're doing it gradually, because too much chaos too soon will create havoc. Although 1 or 2 players might thrive under those conditions, and again it's about finding that balance. We just need to make sure that we're managing their motivation and their enjoyment. But as they get older and more competent in playing the game, and their playing years are increasing, so playing years would be someone who started at 5, is now 15, has had 10 years playing experience, we can start to explore and share in greater detail information. So whether it's, okay, here's your individual roles and inverted fullback within the back 4, here's how you'll operate. That's going to link to your midfield, which might be a box midfield with 1 holding. This is your relationship and connection with them. That's the kind of information that 1, they'll crave, but 2, it's our duty to give in the bigger piece of work. It's just, I think, picking and choosing your time. The dots and the light bulbs almost just start to ping naturally. As
we're talking here, I'm keep thinking about the game styles, and we've spoken very much about, you know, the technical element and the tactical element, but we can't not consider the psychological element, the social element, the physiological element of the game style as well. What's required in those areas for the players to do that effectively. And again, as coaches, it's our responsibility to make sure that all of the 4 corners are factored into session design. And what can help with that is, you know, the simple player profiling around the 4 corners, because that will enable you to hone in on what are your players' superpowers, and are you making best use of individual superpowers linked to your chosen playing style or playing styles, being ready for the plan B, C and D. But if you've got superpowers and super strengths, but you've also got areas of development / weaknesses, and you've got it mapped out, and it's a case of, we're going to work through this together, here's how you fit into how I would like to set up to play, and here's how you're going to contribute. I think that's a really powerful conversation to have. So to wrap up this discussion, what are your quick fire top tips to help coaches develop and implement game styles with their players? I'm going to use a quote that's on the corridors in the St George's Park here, which is, "Simplicity's genius." So I think as long as your messages are clear, memorable and purposeful, the players are more likely to, 1, buy in because they'll understand, and 2, they're more likely to remember, especially under the heat of lights or the pressure of the game, when it's throwing something at them that they're maybe a little bit unsure of. That would be my first top tip. In mine goes back to the point about skillful observers. So how as coaches can we understand what our players can and can't do? How can we support them on their journey to develop those points that where we want them to get better? And how can we turn those strengths into super strengths and help them understand what they are themselves? Because that will just reap so many rewards. The confidence that will flow within them will then hopefully get that buy-in, and they'll kind of really then adhere to that style of play that you want to bring in. Yeah. So mine would be just to understand your purpose as the coach. What is it that you're trying to do? and be consistent with your messages. Be determined in terms of what you want to achieve, and be patient, because it takes time.
I'd also say look for little opportunities, because coaching's about moments to reinforce those messages. How you might use a conversation before training starts, or as you walk into the car at the end of training. Just those little individual moments between you and a player, or it might be a group of players linked to a unit conversation. You might say to your two centre-backs, oh, have you got 2 minutes at the end of training? Let's just walk and talk as we go back to the car. Because again, if we're referring to a lot of coaches here who are volunteers, you've got to be really clever with your time, and we know that contact time with players is limited in the world of grassroots football. So make that work for you, because that will really help you to reinforce and revisit those messages.